Something completely unprecedented is happening inside the Canadian Parliament, and it is happening with a clinical speed that the opposition was never prepared for. For months, the baseline assumption in Ottawa was that the traditional opposition would simply hold its ground. They thought the status quo was safe. They expected a standard political cycle of back-and-forth bickering. But what we are witnessing right now is not a routine political cycle. It is a calculated consolidation of power, because when the world outside becomes radically volatile, the political structures inside must either adapt immediately or collapse entirely. And that adaptation is unfolding in real time right in front of us. This is not just about a few unhappy politicians changing their minds. It is about a structural realignment of Canadian leadership. Look at the speed of these moves. For decades, crossing the floor was considered the ultimate political taboo. It was a rare anomaly reserved for deep, unresolvable ideological crises. But under Mark Carney, that anomaly has effectively become a monthly occurrence. The exodus from Pierre Poilievre's camp is real, and it is accelerating. Because when veteran politicians abandon an 11-year career in opposition, they aren't just moving to a different seat. They are escaping a sinking narrative. For a factory worker in Ontario or a small business owner in Sarnia, these parliamentary maneuvers might seem like distant games. But they are not. They are the first signals of a massive economic shield being built around their future. Partisan loyalty is dead. Institutional security is the new currency. The system is moving toward a center of gravity that can withstand external shocks. And that is exactly what this moment represents.
And then there were five. Longtime Ontario MP Marilyn Gladu has announced that she's leaving the Conservative Party and joining the government benches. Now, she is the fifth MP to do so in as many months. Her defection means the Liberals are now just one seat away from a majority.
Those numbers do not simply reflect a temporary lapse in party loyalty. They represent a deliberate dismantling of the opposition's architecture. That is not just political commentary. That is positioning. Because when a fifth member of Parliament abandons their post, bringing the governing party within a single seat of a majority, the entire game has changed. This is a structural surrender. It forces us to ask a question that most analysts are too afraid to touch. What is actually driving Ottawa today? It's not just the individuals leaving. It's the sheer diversity of the voices abandoning the traditional opposition. We are seeing figures from entirely different, often conflicting ends of the political spectrum converging under one single tent. This is not about sharing progressive values. It is about pragmatic survival in a world where the old rules no longer apply. Politicians do not walk away from a decade of work and seniority unless they deeply believe the alternative offers something they desperately need to weather an approaching storm. And right now, what they need is not a new policy platform. They need an institutional anchor. They are seeking a firm center of gravity because the global system feels increasingly untethered. This is code for a total defensive posture. Loyalty is no longer bound by party colors or historical slogans. It is bound by the search for institutional security. So, the migration toward the government benches continues, accelerating with each passing month. And, as this consolidation deepens, it leaves the opposition fundamentally hollowed out. They are struggling to articulate a clear purpose in a world that has moved far beyond traditional partisan bickering. They are fighting for the past, while the government is absorbing the future, which naturally leads to the most critical and unavoidable question of this entire phenomenon.
But let's cut to the heart of it, because this show's about politics. There are two unavoidable questions that have to be confronted by people who work in politics and care desperately about politics. And those questions are these. Why is it that opposition MPs seem to be so attracted to joining Mark Carney's caucus? And why is it the Conservative MPs, 4 of them, seem to be so disinterested in remaining in Pierre Poilievre's caucus? That's the fundamental dynamic that's happening here. And we can have a debate about whether or not people should resign and reoffer. We can have a debate about floor crossing and the role it plays in the Westminster model, whatever. Like, what's going on right now in our politics and the political dynamic that is causing people as diverse, right, as Lori Udlut and Marilyn Gladu to join Mark Carney's caucus? This is a very peculiar situation.
That framing is critical because it strips away the illusion of standard partisan politics and exposes the raw mechanics of leadership under immense pressure. The numbers tell a definitive story. They show an exodus toward the only perceived source of stability in a region defined by chaos. The reality is that these MPS are not suddenly discovering a latent liberal ideology that they somehow kept hidden for a decade. That's the surface story. The real story is that they are reacting to a fundamental shift in the definition of national safety. And this is where the political calculus becomes truly strategic for Canada. Because the answer to Scott Reed's question does not lie within the borders of Ottawa alone. It lies in the shadows cast by Washington. Under Donald Trump, the traditional expectations of stable alliances, predictable trade, and guaranteed economic security have been replaced by extreme transactional pressure and geopolitical noise. While Donald Trump uses disruption and threats to fracture global alliances, Mark Carney is utilizing that very pressure to consolidate his domestic power. That line changes everything. When the rhetoric south of the border escalates into active disruption, the appetite for domestic political combat inside Canada begins to evaporate almost instantly. Think about what this means for a family sitting at the kitchen table in a manufacturing town. They are seeing a world where their largest trading partner is no longer predictable. They are seeing their livelihoods threatened by tariffs and unpredictability. They don't want partisan firebrands. They want a leader who projects measured control and structural resilience. Fragmentation is a luxury that Canada can no longer afford in the Trump era. The migration toward Mark Carney is not an endorsement of every single Liberal policy in the mandate. It is a desperate consolidation of stability. In the face of external chaos, internal cohesion is the absolute only viable defense mechanism. And that distinction is vital. It explains exactly why individuals with deeply contrasting social and fiscal views are willing to sit quietly in the same caucus. They are prioritizing national resilience over partisan purity. Because when the threat is external, internal division is a liability that voters simply will not tolerate. The political class is finally waking up to the reality that a divided House cannot withstand a transactional neighbor.
Scott, what seems to occur to me here is that, he is trying to grow the tent, and it's going to be a much bigger tent. How does he manage that, though, when you consider who he's letting into that tent now are some social conservatives or some NDPers? I mean, you can say everybody has a home in the Liberal Party, but really, that is going to be difficult to try and manage and to continue to label it as this is the Liberal Party, this is what we stand for.
Well, I don't go to the grocery store or the gym, but I sure go to the bar. And what I hear people saying is they want a stable government. So that's where the payoff is here. I mean, the cover for all of these MPs is that the Prime Minister is popular. Won't always be popular. Nothing stays forever. But, right now, you don't see a real uprising of negative opinion toward this because Canadians are saying, well, we're under threat from an external source of tension with Donald Trump, and having a majority government, having some tension, having some stability, that is all a positive. And I think, that is the full and complete explanation.
That statement is the true Rosetta Stone for understanding this entire political moment, because it proves definitively that what we are watching is not a debate over domestic governance or tax brackets. It is a defensive recalibration against global unpredictability. The Canadian electorate is looking at the transactional pressure, the erratic escalation, and the sheer disruption defining Donald Trump's Washington, and they are demanding an institutional shield. Leverage. That is what this is about, and Mark Carney is providing exactly that by expanding the perimeter of his government. By growing his tent to include former Conservatives and New Democrats, Carney is not just growing a political party. He is engineering a fortress of structural resilience capable of absorbing external shocks. This is not a standard majority government built on shared historical values. It is an institutional coalition built on shared necessity. And here's where the outcome becomes truly transformative for the future of the country. Carney's measured control stands in absolute contrast to the noise, the rhetoric, and the volatility dominating the United States right now. Where Trump leverages unpredictability to fracture global alliances and extract rapid concessions, Carney is utilizing stability to enforce internal consolidation. He understands at a fundamental level that a nation cannot effectively manage massive external threats if its internal politics are paralyzed by endless partisan friction. So, he is actively absorbing the opposition. He is neutralizing the domestic noise. He is presenting a unified, impenetrable front to the world. For the average Ontarian, this shift represents a promise of predictability in an era of total chaos. It is the realization that in a transactional world, the only way to protect your interests is to maintain a house that cannot be divided from the outside. Ultimately, this is not a story about political opportunism or parliamentary math. It is a striking demonstration of how severe external pressure forces immediate internal adaptation. This is the moment where the rules of Canadian politics were rewritten not by choice, but by survival. And as long as the United States remains a massive source of disruption, the Canadian political landscape will continue this quiet but absolute consolidation. Subscribe to Canada SR for sharp, in-depth analysis on the political dynamics that are quietly reshaping Canada's future. Because moments like this aren't just headlines, they're turning points.